Hello everyone, this is Arlene. It's been like over a year since my last YouTube video. Sorry about that. I know I said last year I was going to upload a lot of content, but that just didn't happen, so sorry about that. Anyways, as you likely have already heard, my new song Next to Me together with H Lazer, POV, and Robbie Hutton has finally been released this past Friday, and I'm so excited about that. This has been in the works for like over a year. So much has been done to it. It has a long history behind it. I just think it's one of the most unique songs to date. Like I really tried to push the boundaries of progressive house with this one, and I think I did that pretty successfully. If you want to see more behind the scenes of how this track came to be, make sure to check out the latest video on PLV's channel. Links in the description. With all that being said, let's get into the mixing and mastering that I did for Next to Me. Hopefully this will help you guys with your own songs, and I hope to do more mixing tutorials in the future. I want that to be like one of the main focuses on my channel. I also plan on doing like challenge videos. I will still plan on doing a Q&A, but I still have the questions from last year, but I will eventually do that. Don't worry. Anyways, let's get into it. Alright, so here's the project file. As you can see, it's pretty big. There is 130 tracks in here, but I will explain a lot of this in this video. So let's go. Oh, by the way, if you see these where we end up dry vocal mix stems, this was from a previous vocal that didn't quite work out, and then we got the Robbie Hutton vocals that are the next to me ones that you hear today. So that's just what these are, and this was actually originally a Fight the Good Fight remix that we explained that more on PLV's channel. So make sure to check it out in the link in the description after watching this. But these were the Fight the Good Fight vocal stems, and I just muted them obviously because this is the original track. So yeah, this is the only vocal that's on. I will explain how I did the mixing later on in this video, so I'll skip the vocals for now. But let's go one by one with each sound. First off, here's the piano sound. So it's your fairly standard piano from Flex. It's the grand piano preset in Flex in the Essential Pianos pack. It's free to download. You just go to free here, you download it. It's not in here because I already downloaded it, but yeah. Anyways, that's what that is. So how did I process this? Honestly, not much at all. So I'm actually controlling the reverb with the Fruity Peak controller right here. So you'll see this down here. So look at the decay down here, or the mix. Look at the mix down here, and you'll see how it gets affected by the peak controller. So basically, it's reducing the reverb every time the dry signal plays, which is a general tip I have for any reverb mixing. I'll explain it later with the leads. Then I just have a standard EQ cutting out the lows. It's always important to cut out lows in sounds that don't need it. You only want the sub bass in the sub bass sound itself, the kick, or if not using a sub bass in a certain part of the song, you could also use the sub range in like impacts or sub drops, stuff like that. But all the other sounds, make sure to cut out the lows because this is like a key step to a good mix. And I also just reduced some highs here because they were a bit aggressive. And then we have this patcher preset. So I literally, what this does, it reduces the mid range in just the sides, so that the mid range in the midsection is warmer. Not quite sure why I did that, but it sounded good in the end. And then we just have a compressor. It's actually compressing quite a lot on some notes, but this is important to do. You want your sounds to be pretty leveled out. And then this EQ I'll explain with the vocal actually a bit later. So I'll not go over that for now. And then we have this simple break kick. So there's like very minimal processing on this. Just to EQ the shape of the sound. And then this peak controller, I'll share what that does after I show the sub bass. Next up, here's the sub bass. You probably will need headphones to hear this, otherwise you won't. But with headphone users, here's what this sounds like. Actually, if I remember correctly, there's upper harmonics in this, so you can slightly hear it without headphones anyway. So what I did is I added Camel Crusher. This is an amazing plugin. I use this literally all the time. It's in like every project. And then I have an EQ just to cut out all of the higher frequencies I don't need in the sub bass. And then a really heavy compressor, keeping the sub bass very leveled out. And then we have this fruity balance. I'm not quite sure what these do, honestly. But once I figure out, I'll explain that better. And then the EQs again. Next, we have this ARP, which I explained in the PLV's video. Sounds like this. Actually, before I move on, I forgot to show you. The sub bass is made with 3x oscillator. I literally just crank this up, this sine wave up a bit, like at 75%. You only really need a sine wave for the sub bass, and then I also put on 2 different octaves so it covers more space. Like that. Alright, now let's move on to the actual ARP. So, this sound is from Spire. It's the Cold Stone the ARP Pluck. And as you can hear, it's like filtering up and down over time. So first off, I have some slight distortion. Or not slight. There's distortion. And then we have OTT. This is also a plugin I use literally all the time. I use this in every single song. So I just have OTT on here at 20%. And then an EQ. As you can see, this EQ is affecting the filtering. It's also affecting the mixing. So if I go farther in on the song, you'll be able to see the full effect of this EQ. So I'm basically just reducing the mids a bit and the high mids a bit. I'm also cutting out a lot of the bass. And this is what it sounds like with almost no filtering. Alright, well, let's move on. Again, we have this compressor. And then we actually have Kickstart for sidechain. I have this on all the time in the track. It just sounded better with Kickstart on all the time. So this is without. And this is with. Yeah, there's that. And then we have the reverb. Let's have some reverb. 5 seconds of decay. This knob is actually down for some reason. Not quite sure why that is, honestly. Well, let's move on regardless. So next up, we have these plucky chord sounds. This is what it sounds like. So you hear it's just like your standard like synthy pluck that you hear in like some audience stuff or whatever. So first we have musical chord gate. And then we have musical chord criminal. And then we have musical pluck destiny. This one's very plucky. And then musical pluck ambient. And then lastly, musical pluck tomorrow. So all that these sounds have is just some basic EQing on all of them. Just some like general touches before moving on to the bus. And then all of them go to this bus where I have an EQ, just controlling the sound a bit, on the low mids, Camel Crusher. And then there's this trick I did, the same trick I showed before, but just with a different reverb plugin. And then we have an EQ, another EQ, limiter, or not a limiter, compressor. And that's pretty much it for the plucks. Next, we have this huge snare for the build-up. Just some resonance cutting, a bit of reverb. That's about it. And then we have this deep respace. I love using respaces. This is what it sounds like. This one's actually pretty aggressive too. So this sounds from Serum, and it's actually my own preset called Fat Respace number 2. But like, as you can hear, it is very aggressive. I added some distortion and compression in the Serum itself. And then for the processing, I added some distortion, Camel Crusher, This, which adds a bit of bit crush. Shout out to Severman for showing this trick on his channel. Then we have effector for a vocal effect here. It's also moving slightly, if you can hear it. And we got an EQ, just, I don't know why it's over there. Just to tame a lot of stuff, and this is up really high just to boost all this, like this area slightly. Because apparently I cut a lot out. I don't know. And then just another compressor. Doing actually pretty heavy amount of compression. And that's it for the respace. Next we have the atmospheric pad. This is what gives the break a lot of its like heavenly vibes, if you could call it that. So this is also from Serum. It's a pad called Peaceful from Wild Crow Sound Bank. I use this sometimes as well. It's pretty good. It's like it's the same old Camo Crusher, the EQ Camo Crusher, the reverb trick right here. Another compressor. This kickstart is for later on. Yeah, pretty basic stuff all around. And then we have this choir, which is not very common, but it adds a lot to the break, I feel. So this is from Flex. It's from the General MIDI library, and it's called Choir Oz. That's what it sounds like. So we have Patcher on here. So what this does is it basically cuts out a lot of the bass area in the mids. It also reduces some of it in the sides. You know, just clean up a bit. And we have some OTT, Fresh Air. I sometimes use this plugin. It's pretty good. It just helps brighten things up. Pretty aggressive EQ, but it works. Compressor. Same old, same old. And then we have these guitar power chords. Actually, I made them in a plugin and then consolidated it. I'll show the plugin later, but this is what the guitar power chords sound like. So this sounds from DVS Guitar, and I had to render it out because this pitch knob does not work on third-party plugins like this. It only works on when you consolidate it to a WAV file. And actually, now is a good time to explain the pitch up thing. So as you can see, pretty much every break sound pitches up in the build, which I thought this added a bit of uniqueness to the build-up and it made it sound memorable, at least to me. But yeah, I needed to do this on the guitar power chords because once again, the DVS guitar is not an option to pitch up the sound. So first, I added some Fruity Blood Overdrive. This is really good for like distorting guitars. I use this pretty frequently on guitar sounds. And it's Camo Crusher again. Camo Crusher is honestly one of my favorite plugins ever. And then another EQ, just taking out a bunch of highs. And then the compressor once again. And then we have some simple break loops. The loops to the break. They sound like this. You probably hear these pretty well in the song, and that's what I wanted. Like I wanted you to hear them well. All these have is just EQs to control them. That's about it. I'm going to skip out on these guitars in the staccato plucks for now because PLV explained that in her behind the track video. So I'll just keep going and explain these effects. So altogether they sound like this. There's quite a lot. That really creates a really good transition into the song. And then there's also these two sounds. They're like synth one shots. I use these quite a lot. This one I made myself with I think the lead. I don't quite remember. And as you can see, 2022 February 6th. That's how long this song has been in progress. I wasn't lying about that. And then we just have some uplifters for the build. Pretty like energetic, and that's what I wanted. And then we have this simple ambient sound. So all this has is just an EQ and cutting some resonances. By the way, sometimes cutting resonances is pretty important, but make sure to not overdo it, because if you overdo it, then you'll cut out too much of the character of the sound, so be careful with it. And yeah, I think that's it with the first break. There's honestly not that much going on. So everything combined together without the vocal sounds like this. Sorry about the lag. This project's pretty big. But as you can hear, you get a pretty full sounding break with all these sounds. So make sure to add ambiances, add as many sounds as you need to fill it out. Don't add too much if you don't need to, but just add exactly the right amount you need to make sure to get a full break. Ambiances is really important, like down here. And yeah, that's about it for the break. Let's explain the drops lead, which I made. H Lazer actually made the drop, or at least contributed a lot to it, so I won't explain the drop in this video. However, I will explain the leads because I made those. So, let's get into it. So altogether, the leads sound like this. Obviously without the pitch bends, because I added those later. So let's just go through each preset one by one. The first one here is from Silent. Actually, all these are from Silent except for one. And this is the music core lead Shine. This is like one of the leads that helps give that mono feeling to the lead stack. Next up, we have music core lead Rockets. As you can hear, it's pretty square lead centered, which is what I wanted in this drop. Next up, we have music core lead Harsh. As the lead name says, this is one of the more aggressive leads in the stack. Really cool sounding in my opinion. Next up, we have the Ultrasonic Heroes lead 5. I actually use this in a lot of my songs. It sounds like this. It's like just a very full super saw sound. And we got the last music core or silence lead. This is called Proton. It's like in lower down an octave, and it's pretty aggressive. And finally, the last layer is the piano. Actually, this is the light version of the grand piano preset I used for the break piano earlier in the song. It sounds like this. I also turn off the delay and reverb on this. It's really important to do that because that makes sure that none of the leads have their own reverb before you do the reverb bus. Or in this case, I didn't actually use a reverb bus in the song, but I don't normally do that. So, yeah. Anyways, let's go over the processing now for the leads. By the way, if you want a whole video on how to do lead processing, just leave it down in the comments below and I'll think of doing that because that might be interesting. That might be an interesting topic to teach you guys about. First off is EQ, where I'm reducing low mids, increasing the mids, decreasing the high mids, and increasing the highs. Pretty crazy looking, but yeah. And I actually I just put both overdrive without any changes. Sounded pretty good. And then this patcher with Camera Crusher and OTT. The reason these aren't patchers is because this chain just got too big and I needed more room, so I put these both in patcher. But Camera Crusher, British clean preset, OTT at 20%. I always use OTT on leads. I love the way it sounds. And we have some saturation. From the saturation knob, this is at like 1 or 1.5. It's like 0.7 or something. I don't quite remember. It's pretty important to add saturation to leads because otherwise they'll sound kind of weak. This is what I learned over my time as a music producer. If you want to make your leads fatter, use saturation. And then we have another EQ, increasing the mids even more. I actually quite decreased the high because Fruity Bud Overdrive makes them really loud. And then the same reverb trick from before. And actually, let me quickly show you the settings. So there's a low cut at 1000 Hz, high cut at 10,000 Hz, slices at 70, decay times at a pretty high 5 seconds, but I wanted that. And then just compressor. Barely doing anything. Oh, yeah, and also the kickstart, it's at the first preset, free punch at 90%. So this is the lead without any sidechain. And this is the lead with the sidechain. So as you can see, sidechain is pretty important for drop sounds like this, because you want that popping effect, and you also want to give room to the kick and stuff like that. And actually, that is not it with the processing. So down here, there's even more processing down this. After it was rendered back to me by H Lazer with a flanger effect, so I added some even more saturation actually. And then another EQ, I actually, with this one, I increased in high mids quite a lot, or like the, whatever this section is, quite a lot, because that was lacking. And then yet another EQ, increasing more of this section, and increasing a bit more of the highs. I also increased the limits a bit. This TDR Nova, I'm not quite sure what this does. Let me double check. Oh yeah, I remember. So it basically just reduces some frequencies dynamically that were too harsh. So TDR Nova is actually a really good free alternative to a plugin called FabFilter Pro Q3. I use this pretty frequently in vocals. I'll explain that later in the vocal mixing process section of the video. So there's an option in here to decrease or increase stuff dynamically on the EQ. You would just use this threshold and drag it down. And then just another compressor. So before I move on to the vocal mixing, I just want to quickly talk about these master effects, because these are actually pretty important for the build-up. So basically what these do is these help make the build-up like a bit weaker over time, and then the drop hits are really hard. So the first one is a volume automation. This slowly decreases the volume by like 1.5 dB, and then brings it back to normal. So you can hear this. And also the stereo separation thing, it makes the song a bit more mono before the drop, so the drop is wider. You'll see both of these right here. And then they come back. Sorry about the lag, by the way. This is for like a low cut on the master, actually. Yeah, that click is because of this. Yeah, that click was because of this EQ, because it just does that. So basically, I just like cut out some of the lows during the build-up. And actually, it goes up to here maximum at like 200 hertz. And then I have a reverb that slowly automates. It's pretty aggressive. 100 room size, no lower high cut. The damping's off the case at 10 seconds, but the wet's only at 38. So this is like my alternative to Endless Smile, because I don't have Endless Smile. But this is like, if you don't have Endless Smile, this is another way you can do the reverb trick. Look at that quick. And yeah, so without all these, I'll turn them all off quickly. Actually, no, I'll just turn off the master chain fully. So this is what it sounds like without all the effects on the master. And then this is with all the master effects. So as you can hear, the drop has a lot more impact. That's why you need these. Alright, so that's about it for this part of the project that I contributed to. The rest of the sounds are either from H Lazer or PLV. Actually, one more sound we can talk about is just quickly this shaker, because I have this in the second break. Nothing too crazy, and I just have an EQ on it. Alright, so as I said, the rest of the sounds in here are either from H Lazer or PLV, or it's just rendered stems from like my own sounds. And I'll come back to this project later on in the video to explain the rest of the vocal processing here. But now, let's move on to a different project and show how I do the vocal processing. Alright, so now we're in the vocal processing FLP. So as you can see, it looks very different. So what I like to process my vocals in a separate project and then export it into the actual song, because this way I just save my CPU, and also it's more efficient because these instrumentals right here. Oh, by the way, this is just the instrumental of the whole song. So if you want to hear the instrumental briefly, it sounds like this. But yeah, I have that muted when I was rendering it out. So I used this as a reference when mixing the vocals so that I knew what they would sound like and like similar to the finished product. That's why I have a reverb here that's turned off now. Alright, so I got all these vocal stems from Robbie besides these two. I'll explain those later. And these two. I'll explain what these are later. But these four, I did not make myself. The rest are from Robbie. He honestly did an amazing job on these vocals. I'm really happy with the result of them. You know, he's just a really good vocalist. If you wanna get a good vocalist for your song, I recommend him. He's pretty good. So here is the main vocal. Here's what it sounds like.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth that I left behind, twisted and broken.
So right off the bat, it sounds pretty good. If I turn off all of the mixing, it sounds like this.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth.
So even without any mixing, it sounds pretty good. With the mixing, vocal mixing, basically you want to make it sound pretty like compressed and also like it pops out enough in the mix and yeah, and just cut out the lows and stuff like that. So let me explain this. First, I have an EQ where I cut out the lows. I reduced some of this area because it was a little harsh. Then I increased the highs. So with this EQ, it goes from this
out in the open
to this.
Out in the open.
Yeah, the vocals are brighter. And then I have a TDR Nova here. This is reducing a lot of frequencies dynamically. I already explained this in a previous project, but here's what it does on the vocal.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth that...
So this is just to control some of the frequencies that are popping out too much. And then I have one compressor that's only compressing like the very peaks of the vocal. It also has a pretty high ratio.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth that I left behind.
So as you can see, it's only really compressing the very high peaks. And this is what I went for, because I wanted to first get those peaks down to the volume of the rest of the vocal. And then with the next compressor, I compressed a whole vocal by itself, so that way the vocal sounds more compressed, more transparent, and all of that. This is what the second compressor is doing.
Out in the open,
as you can see,
the
compression is much more general. And it's also pretty controlled. So make sure you do two compressors on your vocals. One where it just compresses the peaks, and another one where you compress the actual vocal itself in full. That way it sounds more compressed, more transparent, and it sounds better. Next, I'll explain the doubles. They sound like this.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me.
So this basically helps make your vocal really wide. So what I did with these is I panned this one 50% left, this one 50% right. I'm pretty sure they're different takes. Yeah, I think they are. So that's why it sounds pretty natural. So on these, I again have an EQ. And then the TDR Nova once again.
So
basically the same exact processing as the other vocals. So let's move on. Next, we got these harmonies that are found later on in the song. Sound like this.
Just have faith. No, I've been trying hard to find the weather now and forever. So when the universe comes crashing down on me.
This adds a lot more like depth to the vocal here. So actually, I'll play it. So without these, this part sounds like this.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me.
And with them, it sounds like this.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me.
Harmonies are important. Anyways, let's move on to the processing of these. Nothing too crazy. Pretty much the exact same processing as before. Yep, it's exact same. And then we have these lower harmonies, where we have these harmonies down here.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me, I need your remedy.
They sound kind of weird on their own, but they add a lot to this part. I think they're all one of the high ones is also over here, and as you can hear, there's a low one too. So this has the same processing. The low one, exact same processing, but I added some low mids here, and I also decreased a bit this part so that there's more bass in this low vocal, because that's what I went for. Because in those bass vocals, you obviously want more bass. And it also adds a lot of body to the vocal. Next, I'll explain these, like, ooh things. So, you'll probably hear it at the beginning of the song. They sound like this. So, actually, Robbie only sent me this originally. And this has a bit different processing. Same thing as before, but this time I really decreased this part. Just to control that, but everything else is the same. And then I added these myself. So you're probably thinking, Arlene, how did you get those harmonies or double vocals? He didn't send you the double vocals, right? Well, here's the trick I did. So, as you can see, they're 100% left and the other one's 100% right. So these are literally the exact same vocals, but what I did, here's a neat trick to create side vocals with one stem. This is pitched down 10 cents, like the lowest it could possibly go. And then this one's pitched up 10 cents. So this actually makes the vocal unique in a way, and it allows you to put them on the sides. So in this one, there's quite a lot of processing to make it sound different from these, and to make it fit better. We have the same stuff here, but then we have a chorus, and I just reduced the mix a bit. This is without the chorus. This is with the chorus. So it makes it like a little bit wider, a little bit softer, and that's good. And then we have this patch here where it decreases a lot, like this area in the mid section, and decreases some of the highs in the mid section, and does the same on the sides. This is just to control the mid section of the mid frequencies more. And we have this very, very short reverb, literally 0.2 seconds, just to give it a teeny bit of space. Look at 605, high cut 10K, what levels at 15, really, really short. You probably barely even hear it. And then one more limiter. So combine that with the original, and it sounds like this. And it also sounds pretty good with this part near the end. As you can hear, it sounds pretty natural, and you can't really tell that these doubles were artificially made by me. And I think that's about it for all of these. Oh no, there's an ad-lib left. Alright, this is what it sounds like. So this first part of the ad-lib is actually cut out in the final product because Jupiter requested it. So, but there was more ad-libs here in the second drop originally.
Next to me,
And then later on,
next
you have
to
this
me,
harmony.
next to me,
And this is actually the only part that was in the final product. So this part is gone, as I said. And this part is in here, but the mixing is still the same. So first off, you have all the same processing so far. But this one actually has different processing, this second ooh thing. So this, once again, this stuff, and then I have the same patch of chords, breeze, reverb stuff on this one too, to separate this from this and make it sound better. Now, let's get into the actual vocal bus. So I'll explain it using this section of the vocals. So once I'll turn this on now. This too. These are the exact same processing, so it's okay. We have an EQ just increasing the low mids a little bit and take out a resonance in this part. A TDR and over to get rid of the S's. This is called de-essing. Actually, the preset's up here. De-S split. And what it does, it like decreases the highs of the S sound dynamically. So listen to this.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me, I need your remedy to come and set me free.
If you don't have that, your S's will sound too harsh, so it's really important. Then we have another compressor.
So when the universe comes crashing down on me, I need your remedy.
So this one's really compressing, like the really high peaks, and that's what I wanted. And then again, this one.
So when the universe comes crashing down,
is compressing the vocals a whole just slightly. And it's the exact same on this one. And finally, we have one more bus where I'm doing one more low cut just to make sure that all of it's gone. and another compressor, which is actually not doing anything originally.
So when the universe comes crashing down.
But I use it later on in this part when the oohs come in at the same time that this vocal section plays.
Next to me.
So just to take care of that a little bit more, because that pops out a little too much in the mix. And yeah, that's about it with the vocal processing. So altogether, the vocal sounds like this.
Just have faith. No, I've been trying. So when the universe comes crashing down on me, I need your remedy to come and set me free.
Alright, so after I did all of this, I rendered this out into one take, and then I put it back into the actual project and did a bit more processing to it. So I'll explain that right now. Alright, so we're back in the original project, and as you can see, the vocal mix is right here. And I'll just check all these automations quickly while I'm here, because these are all in effect while the vocal's playing. And then I'll explain that one trick I talked about earlier on in the video, and I'll finally explain how it works. So, this is what the vocal sounds like without any sync processing at all. And yeah, this will just sound the exact same as it did before.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth that I left behind.
Alright, now I'll enable this, and first, I had this saturation knob here, but I decided not to use it in the end, because I used this in the previous vocal we had, but I decided not to use it anymore. And then we have a bunch of peak controller stuff. I will explain all of that as I move through this. So first, next up, we have this hall reverb. Yeah, the hall reverb. It sounds like this. So this is like your standard reverb that you hear in a lot of stuff, especially vocals. So let's look at the presets did. So we have room size 50, low cuts at 600 Hz, high cuts at 10K, decay times 3, pre-delays like 10 milliseconds. Levels at 100 obviously, because this is a bus, so you want the dry at 0 and the wet at 100. And then we have an EQ, just control a lot. It's actually pretty aggressive, but whatever. And then we have some fruity balance stuff. So hopefully I can explain this in here. So as you can see, every time the dry vocal plays, this decreases a bit. Not quite sure what this does, honestly. And then we have this plate reverb. This like puts the vocal in a certain space in the mix. As you can hear, it's much shorter. So for this, I used Valhalla Supermassive and used this preset called Cirrus Minor Default preset. Shout out to POV for showing me this. I did not know about this trick, but it really worked in the mix. So shout out to her. So as you can see, mix is at 100, width's at 100. The warps is at 56%. That creates that reverb because originally this is the delay plugin, so adding this warp makes it a reverb. Feedback 68. Rates at 0.30, depths at 50, and then we have low cut at 600, high cut at around 5.2K, and another EQ just to control it, and then the same fruity balancing from before. Next we have this delay. It sounds like this. So a delay is really important in vocals to give it a bit of space in the mix, besides the reverb, because it like duplicates the vocal over and over again, so those like words appear for longer and it fills up space. So for this I use Fruity Delay 3. I set the time to 2, ping pong mode, levels at 50, cutoffs at 1000 on the bandpass mode, and obviously the dry is completely down and the wet's completely up. And then we have an EQ here, controlling it. The TDR Nova is control the S sound really, really aggressively. Because I did not want the S sound in the delay, obviously. And then the same trick from before. But this time, it's at 6, and it's more aggressive. than the reverbs. And then we have this thing called parallel compression. So this is a little advanced, but basically what it does is you just compress the vocal like a ton. As you can see, it's at like minus 32 dB ratio on the threshold. And the ratio is at 20. So this is what it sounds like.
Out in the open,
So as you can see, there's just a ridiculous amount of compression. And then if you combine it with the vocal itself, this is without the parallel compression.
out in the open,
And this is with it.
out in the open.
As you can hear, it just makes the vocal stand out a bit more. And then everything combined before the final bus sounds like this.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth that I left behind.
Alright, I'll explain a couple more things before we move on to the mastering. This is the final bus of the vocal. So we just went for one more EQ to control some resonances, increase the high mids very slightly, decrease this very slightly. Another de-esser, and also decreasing a part here that was too harsh.
Out in the open, and a million.
And then one more compressor. This is barely doing anything. It's just for this part over here where the vocal gets really loud.
Out in the open.
Actually, I'll show that really quickly right now. This is when the vocal gets really loud, so you'll see it.
When you are next to me.
So it like very, very quickly controls that. Now, let's explain why I have an EQ at the end of each of these that looks like it does nothing. So I'll explain this at the piano. So basically what I do is I take this fruity peak controller on the final bus of the vocal, and then I link it to an EQ on one of these break sounds. So this EQ right here. It's actually not the right EQ, but this. So what I do is I actually decrease some frequencies dynamically while the vocal plays. So you'll see this.
Out in the open, and a million miles from the truth.
So as you can see, it's like decreasing on the parts where the vocal's present, so that the vocal is more present. And I do this a lot of time at the time of my vocals to just make them stand out a bit more in the mix. It's pretty important. And yeah, that is about it for everything on my side. If you want to see more of what PLV did on her end with the second break and the sounds she sent me, then check out the behind the track video on her channel, where we also explain the behind the scenes of how this track came to be. So anyways, with that being said, let's head to the mastering. Alright, so this is what the mastering project looks like. As you can see, there's a bunch of different versions of this song. Basically, there was a bunch of different versions of the previous vocal version that I rendered out over time. And then there was also a few more versions of the radio edit, and then the extended mix. There's a lot of wave files in here. There's usually not this many wave files in a mastering project of mine, but this is just what happened. So let me explain the mastering. So the master I'll be showing is the extended mix. You can find this on my YouTube channel, the previous video that I uploaded. It's also on Beatport, on Spotify, stuff like that. Alright, so I'm going to explain the mastering now, one by one. So first off, we just have this fruity balance for volume reasons. So, as you can see right here, the break's a little bit quieter than before. And this gets to drop way more impact. Listen to this. It's really powerful now. And then next up, we're going to explain the actual mastering process. So mastering, in my opinion, is not as difficult as everyone says it is. It's like pretty straightforward. It's just some basic EQ tweaking, slight compression, boosting up the volume like with the limiter or whatever to make it commercially loud. It's not too complicated in my opinion, but it can get very advanced, and I know that. I just don't like to do that personally. So first off, we have an EQ where I'm just reducing the low mids a little bit and increasing the high mids a little bit. So with this EQ, it sounds like this now. So it sounds a little bit brighter now. And then I have this patcher with a little trick that a lot of people don't know. So what I do is I actually did a little too much in this song. I don't do cut this high in other recent projects, but basically what I do So that cut out the sub bass of the sides in total, like fully. So nowadays I would do this at like 112 hertz, not 140. But this like helps to make the song sound a bit cleaner on the sides because you don't have all the sub frequencies that you don't need. I typically already do this in the mix, but I just do it again in the mastering just one last time to make sure. But that's a pretty underrated trick in my opinion, and it helps your master be a bit cleaner. Next up, we have the low and high cut. You see this a lot. So we have a low cut at around 25 hertz, and then the high cut is at 16.5 kHz. Nowadays, I would put this at 19,000 hertz because you can't put your high cut at 16.5 kHz, but I know some people can hear above that, so, and it might be a little too much. So nowadays I do 19K, but on this case I did 16K. So with it sounds like this. So not a gigantic difference. You can't even really hear it. So what this does, it basically allows you to push your song more in the limiter at the end because you don't have this really, really, really low sub bass, and you also cutting out a bit of the highs reduces the loudness very, very, very slightly. So it's important to do that. Next up, we have a Maximus that is doing multi-band compression. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but I'm going to explain it in the best way I can. So on the lows, I'm doing this. So as you can see, it's literally compressing the kick the slightest possible. And for this, I had the attack at 0, the release is at 100. Basically what this does, it just controls the sub to make sure it's at one consistent volume throughout. And then on the mids, I have this. Just controlling the peaks of the mids that pop out too much. This attack's at 2, the release is at 85. And I actually increased the stereo separation of the mids here by 5% because I thought it could be a little bit wider. So also, when explaining this, a good trick to keep in mind is to check the thing down here, the correlation meter. So you want to make sure this doesn't really go to the left at all. Let me show you this. As you can see, it's not really going to the left, and that's what you want. And for the highs, I have this attack at 15, the release is at 50, and it's just really very slightly compressing the transient. And as you see, this just barely goes over to the left sometimes, because you want the highs pretty wide in general, and it's at it's at 15% separation. And then we have the final Maximus, which basically makes the song super, super ultra loud. So for this, I love to use a plugin called Lean Loudness Meter 2. I'm just going to decrease the size of it so you can see this better. Alright, now that it's smaller, it should look better. So basically, what this does is it's a free loudness measure. So you want to look at this value right here, LUFS. So typically in progressive house, usually the value is in between -4 to -7 or -8 LUFS. I don't recommend you go -8 because it's a little too quiet, but -7 to -4 should be good. Some people go -3, but that's a little too much in my opinion. But that's definitely, you could definitely do that without causing distortion. So I'll explain all that right now. So what I do first is I put the threshold at 1% saturation so that nothing goes above this part here. And then the saturation ceiling is at minus 0.1 dB. You can do -1 dB, like for MP3 to be safe, but for this, I did not render out an MP3. I think. I don't remember. But for Wave, it should be fine if you do just -0.1. And then, basically, I take this post gain and just crank it up as much as possible until I hear distortion. And then once I hear distortion, I can come back a little bit, and then I check other parts of the song to hear if they're distorting. And if they are, I turn it down a bit more. And then I just look at the loudness afterwards. So, this will get pretty loud, but this is what it sounds like with the loudness. So as you can see, it averages around -5, -5.5. In the second half of the drop, I think it goes to around -4.5. So that's what you want to aim for. As you can hear, the song is pretty loud, and it fits well with Spotify and stuff, and all other streaming platforms, and that's what you want. So
key to mastering is to make the song loud, make it sound a bit cleaner, and just tiny things. You want to barely hear a difference afterwards. So this is the song before any mastering. And this is a song with the mastering. Oh, we got a peak spike there. But yeah, not a huge difference, except that it's way louder and it's a tiny bit cleaner. So mastering, that's what mastering is supposed to do. You're supposed to make your song a bit cleaner and way louder. And that's the purpose of it. Lastly, I wanted to show you the frequency spectrum because this is important. So for progressive house, you want a frequency spectrum like this. Alright, so you can see the sub bass is at around the same volume as the highs. The low mids are dropped a bit because this area sounds pretty harsh or like pretty muddy usually in songs. So a lot of these have this area dropped a bit, and then the highs are pretty flat overall. And this is like the optimal frequency spectrum you would want for your song. If you have it like that, you're good to go. Or somewhere around that. It doesn't have to be exactly accurate, but somewhere around that should be good. So that is about it for this video, I'm pretty sure. I explained the mixing of the song, I explained the vocal mixing, I explained the mastering, and that's basically all I did for my portion of the song. So let's head to the outro.
So that's pretty much the end of this video on how I mixed and mastered my side of Next to Me. So as you can see, nothing too crazy with the mixing. What you basically need, the essentials are EQing, compression, reverb, and other various effects occasionally. But EQing and balancing the volume levels are the most important. So if you do those two things, you'll have a decent mix. I think my next video will be a Q&A. I'll try to do it this year. I promised it last year, but it didn't happen. But I'll try to do it this year, hopefully. So once again, if you want to see how the track was made, like how the track came to be, make sure to check out the video on PLB's channel. The links is in the description. And lastly, make sure to follow me on all my socials. I am active here on YouTube. I'm also active on Instagram, Twitter. I'm also have a Discord server. So if you want to join that, the links in the description as well. I also have a SoundCloud account where all my songs are out, even the ones that are not on Spotify. So make sure to check all that out. And yeah, I hope this helped any of you who wanted to learn about how to mix and master a song and what it takes. Because that's pretty much my goal of this channel, to do challenges and also to help you guys out, because I know a lot of you need help with producing. Oh, by the way, also, if you have any video ideas, make sure to put them down in the comments below. I read every single comment, so if I like an idea, I'll take it into consideration. With all that being said, make sure to stream my new song Next to Me with H Lazer, Jupita, and Robbie Hutton. It is out everywhere on Jupita. We're all super proud of the song, and we're so happy it's finally out. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.